The Heinkel He announced itself to the world in spectacular fashion. Stripped of its guns and observation equipment to save weight, the prototype thundered around a closed circuit over the Baltic, breaking 8 world speed records for seaplanes in a single afternoon. Germany had every reason to be proud. Before long, it even had international orders. The problem was that qualifier, for seaplanes. Because the war that began 18 months later would not be decided by seaplanes. It would be decided by Spitfires and Messerschmitts, lean, lethal machines that could do 350 miles an hour in level flight and be scrambled to intercept an intruder in minutes. Against them, the He-115's record-breaking top speed of just over 200 miles per hour was not an achievement to boast about. It was a vulnerability to hide. And so Germany hid it in the dark. On the night of November 20th, 1939, an He-115 lifted off from the island of Sylt and headed west, its nearly 73-foot wings carrying 3 men, pilot, navigator, and radio operator, low over a black and freezing North Sea. No lights, engines throttled back. The crew hunched over their instruments, watching the coastline materialize out of the darkness ahead. Below them, stretching toward London, was the Thames estuary, one of the busiest waterways in the world, and tonight, the target. The navigator gave the word. A magnetic mine, weighing just over a ton, fell away into the blackness, drifting down on a parachute toward the water below. Silent, invisible, lethal. By the time it settled on the seabed, the He-115 was already turning for home. Night after night, they came, targeting the Thames, the approaches to Southampton, the Bristol Channel. It was unglamorous, methodical work. But it was working. And it was working precisely because the RAF couldn't engage what it couldn't find. The question was how long that would remain true. By 1940, British radar was improving, and night defenses were tightening. Even the cover of darkness was becoming unreliable. Crews began to be lost. Germany increasingly pushed the aircraft further north, away from British defenses and into the Arctic, where Luftwaffe He-115s joined the campaign against the Allied convoys supplying the Soviet Union. There, at least, the He-115 could operate without constantly looking over its shoulder. The convoys were long, the escorts were thin, and in the early years, there was little air cover to speak of. In July 1942, He-115s played a small but real role in the destruction of convoy PQ-17, one of the most catastrophic Allied naval disasters of the entire war, in which a controversial order to scatter left 35 merchant ships without escort. 23 of them were sunk. But while German crews were flying their missions over the Arctic, a far stranger chapter in the He-115 story had already begun. Germany had, in a sense, begun losing control of the He-115 before the war started. In August 1939, just weeks before the invasion of Poland, it had sold 6 of them to Norway. A straightforward commercial transaction, a respected manufacturer supplying a small nation, modernizing its naval air arm. Nobody on either side could have imagined that within 8 months, those same floatplanes would be flying against the country that built them. When Germany invaded Norway on April 9, 1940, it created the unusual situation of 2 opposing nations fielding the same exact aircraft type. Though this wouldn't be the only time this happened in World War II, it remained one of the clearest examples of both sides operating the same aircraft simultaneously, in the same theater and in the same role. This also led to a rare opportunity for both the Germans and the Norwegians. When either side captured an enemy He-115, there was nothing to learn, no conversion training to undergo, no technical evaluation needed. Both nations already knew the aircraft inside out. A fresh coat of paint and a change of markings, and they could be up in the air again within hours. Germany was the first to benefit, capturing an He-115 near the southwestern city of Stavanger on the first day of the invasion. But Norway wasn't far behind. 2 German HE-115s, flying north and running low on fuel, were forced to make emergency landings in northern Norway, one at a remote village and one at a small coastal town. They'd barely come to rest before they were surrounded. An improvised militia of Norwegian riflemen at one site, police officers at the other. The Germans had no choice but to surrender, leaving their aircraft to join Norway's existing HE-115s in the skies. For 2 months, the Norwegians fought off the enemy with everything they had. Their HE-115 crews flew ground support missions for the army, attacked German shipping, and scored at least one notable success, catching a formation of German Ju-52 transport aircraft on the water at Gylfjordbotn and hitting them before they could respond. But Germany's grip on the country was tightening, and the Norwegians knew they couldn't hold out forever. Now, their air crews had to plan their next move. By early June 1940, it was over. German forces controlled southern Norway, and the remaining Allied troops in the north were preparing to evacuate. For the Norwegian HE-115 crews, the choice was stark: abandon their aircraft or fly them out before the Germans seized them. Except one, which was deemed unserviceable and left on base, they decided to fly. As Norwegian forces were ordered to cease hostilities, the 6 surviving HE-115s made their escape. The preferred destination was Britain, on its way to becoming the last free Allied country in Europe. However, one was judged too unreliable to cross hundreds of miles of open water, so its crew turned east instead, landing on a remote lake in Finland and posing as civilians in a last-ditch attempt to avoid internment. Another was lost somewhere over the North Sea, its crew never found. As Norway collapsed behind them, the 4 remaining floatplanes touched down in Scotland. The Royal Air Force received the battered HE-115s and their battle-weary crews. The German-built aircraft were now in the hands of their creators' greatest rivals. The British didn't waste time finding a home for the newcomers. The 4 HE-115s were placed under RAF authority and reformed into a single unit, the Norwegian Helensburgh Group, named after the town in western Scotland where they were based. One of the HE-115 pilots, Commander Hans Andreas Bugge, was appointed as its leader. For the Norwegian crews, the priority was clear: get back into the fight. Their country was occupied. Their government was in exile. They wanted to do something. In early July 1940, the exiled Norwegian government proposed exactly that. The 4 HE-115s would fly to Scapa Flow, and from there, carry out a leaflet mission over Norway. They would drop a printed declaration over Oslo, Bergen, and Trondheim, telling the Norwegian people that their government had not surrendered, had not accepted the German occupation, and was fighting on from abroad. The aircraft were already at Scapa Flow, the crews briefed and ready, when the British Air Ministry intervened. As far as the ministry was concerned, sending slow floatplanes to fly over 3 of occupied Norway's largest cities without fighter cover was a mission they were unlikely to return from, so the HE-115s were sent back to Helensburgh. The British weren't keen on the idea of losing the German-built aircraft so soon after having acquired them. For 3 of the HE-115s, they had another plan in mind. The floatplanes were handed over to British intelligence and sent for significant modifications. Extra fuel tanks were installed, extending the aircraft's already considerable range. Much of the glazed cockpit paneling was stripped out. 8 Browning machine guns were fitted to the wings, and the aircraft were painted black. Whatever role Britain had picked them out for, it certainly wasn't leaflet dropping. As summer 1941 arrived, one of the HE-115s, designated BV-185, was readied for deployment. It was to be sent to Malta, a small British island fortress in the heart of the hotly contested Mediterranean theater. The unit that would run the aircraft was designated Z-Flight, operating under Colonel Bertram Eade, the defense security officer at Malta. Its existence was not to be discussed. The pilot chosen to deliver BV-185 was Lieutenant Håkon Offerdal, a Norwegian naval officer who'd fought in the invasion of his country the previous year, escaped to Britain, and spent the intervening months flying dangerous reconnaissance missions along the Norwegian coast. He was experienced, discreet, and he already knew the HE-115 intimately. On the night of June 23, 1941, he landed the floatplane at Kalafrana Seaplane Base on the southeastern coast of Malta. The aircraft was immediately wheeled into a hangar with a slipway down to the water, and the doors were locked shut. Most of the personnel at Kalafrana had no idea what was being kept on the base, but they started to notice unusual comings and goings that hinted that something was going on. From time to time, two strangers would appear in the bar at the officers' mess. They were older than the usual aircrew, wearing plain khaki shirts and shorts, with no regimental insignia of any kind. They were friendly enough, but guarded. They spoke vaguely of having contacts in North Africa, of traveling there occasionally, of bringing back information, but they never answered questions about how they got there or what they did when they arrived. One night, a group of RAF aircrew walking back along the waterfront near Kalafrana made a detour past the hangar. They'd noticed it before. Mysterious, always closed, always guarded. Tonight, there was something different. Muted activity around the doors, shadows moving in the darkness. Before they could get any closer, they were surrounded by armed soldiers. Identity cards checked, bodies searched. Then they were told to face a wall, hands above their heads. One of them risked a look under his arm. A large seaplane, painted black with German markings, was being eased out of the shed, guided down the slipway and into the water. Its engine started. It accelerated across the harbor, lifted off the surface, and climbed away into the darkness. The next morning, they went to the intelligence officer at their airfield and told him what they'd seen. He showed no surprise. He took them into his office, closed the door, and told them the aircraft was being used for intelligence purposes. Then he told them to forget everything. 2 weeks later, they walked past the shed again. They shone a torch through a crack in the doors. It was empty. What they almost certainly didn't know was that one of their fellow aircrew had watched the same aircraft depart on its final mission. Ron Schofield of 105 Squadron had been in the officers' mess on the night of September 21st, 1941, when BV-185 was wheeled out of the hangar, launched down the slipway, and taxied out toward the harbor entrance. He watched it accelerate across the water, lift off, and disappear into the distance. Then, almost out of sight, it turned into a bright flash of light. A ferry Swordfish was sent to conduct a search and rescue mission the following morning. The pilot found wreckage floating in the sea, 23 miles north of Malta, along with 2 lifeless crew members. Flight Sergeants Georges Blaise and Raoul Gatien. A third man, Sub-Lieutenant Roy Drake of the Fleet Air Arm, was never recovered. No explanation of what happened was ever given. Schofield and his fellow aircrew never heard another word about it. The only thing they knew for certain was that they never saw the 2 men from the bar again. Yet while BV-185 was gone, said flight was far from over. A second HE-115, designated BV-187, was sent to Malta. With it came a new ground crew, among them a young aircraft fitter named George Raystrick, who arrived at Kalafrana in September 1941 and found himself assigned to service an aircraft unlike anything he had dealt with before. It was German. There were no manuals. He and his crewmates had to learn by carefully working on it until they understood it. Raystrick would soon get a glimpse at the missions he was maintaining it for. After towing the floatplane out of the hangar and into the water, the ground crew would help a mysterious passenger on board. Usually it was a man, but one was a woman. Sometimes they would be in disguise, for example as an Italian workman. One arrived with a bicycle that folded into a compact bundle for the crossing. Raystrick learned that the HU-115 was flying to Sicily, the toe of Italy, and Crete. But the ground crew was never told who the passengers were, and they weren't supposed to ask. They certainly weren't briefed on the activities that would be carried out when the aircraft reached its destination. Throughout the final months of 1941 and into the new year, BV-187 conducted 7 of these clandestine missions, always in the dead of night to maintain secrecy. But on February 5th, 1942, it would unexpectedly see daylight. RAF Calafrana's commanding officer had been growing restless, his job on the base mostly consisting of administrative work, rather than the flying role he'd trained for. Desperate for some excitement, he somehow obtained permission to take the HU-115 for a spin. An aircraft that wasn't supposed to exist at all was going on a joyride through one of the most dangerous corridors of the Mediterranean in the middle of the day. As Raystrick and the rest of the ground crew watched the commanding officer taxi out and take off, they couldn't help but have a bad feeling about what might happen. They were right to worry. A short while later, as BV-187 came back toward Calafrana, the ground crew realized the floatplane was being followed by a pair of Messerschmitts. Just before it landed on the water, the German fighters let off a burst of fire. The ground crew dove to the floor. BV-187 exploded. The commanding officer's irresponsibility had cost him his life, and Calafrana had lost a second HU-115, just 4.5 months after the first. Z flight was over. The British still had 2 HU-115s in their possession, for now. BV-184 flew at least one operation. In the spring of 1942, it was flying over the Bay of Biscay when it was attacked without warning by 2 Polish Spitfire pilots, who likely assumed it was an enemy aircraft. The starboard propeller was shot away, and the wing caught fire. The crew somehow put it down on the water and survived. The HU-115 was recovered and repaired, but was lost several months later in a refueling fire at a Scottish base. Its remains were handed to the British Overseas Airways Corporation for spare parts. Meanwhile, BV-186, the fourth and last HU-115 in Allied hands, never flew operationally at all. For reasons unclear, it was quietly scrapped at a Scottish seaplane base in December 1942 by British personnel. The RAF's HU-115s were all gone. The German-built floatplane would never fly another mission for Britain. Yet, in British hands, it had proven itself more than capable of performing a role it had never been envisioned for. It had been designed as a weapon of war, a mine layer, a torpedo bomber, a convoy hunter. But it had shown it was close to ideal for something else entirely, operations that couldn't officially exist. It could land almost anywhere there was water. It was reliable enough to trust with a single crew, far from any base in the middle of the night. And it was quiet enough and slow enough to do things that faster aircraft simply couldn't. Britain had never admitted to having had HU-115s serve in its Air Force, much less revealed how it had chosen to use them. Yet interestingly, other countries independently arrived at similar conclusions about how to maximize the floatplane's potential. The HU-115, which had turned east and landed on a remote lake in Finland, had been swiftly interned by the Finnish authorities. The nation was at peace at the time, its winter war with the Soviet Union having ended 3 months earlier, so for a year it had sat idle, going nowhere. But in June 1941, as Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union, the Finns seized the opportunity to resume the fight against their old rivals. Suddenly, the HU-115 saw itself pressed into service once more. Just as Britain had used the floatplane to insert its special agents into enemy territory under the cover of darkness, Finland would do the same. Night after night, the HU-115, nicknamed Jenny, would carefully navigate over Finland's thousands of lakes. Flying beyond Soviet lines, Jenny would land on the water and deposit CC troops, Finland's special forces, who would stealthily make for the shore and melt into the surrounding forests to conduct their daring missions. However, on July 4th, 1943, Jenny was ambushed in the Soviet-held territory of East Karelia. The crew managed to get airborne, but were forced to ditch shortly afterward and were taken prisoner. 2 days later, Finnish aircraft located the wreck, still floating on the water, and strafed it to prevent it from falling into Soviet hands. Whether they succeeded is unclear. Reports indicate the Soviets salvaged what remained for evaluation. Whatever really happened to Jenny, the aircraft's loss didn't mark the end of Finland's covert HE-115 missions. 2 German HE-115s were subsequently loaned to the Finnish Air Force, their Luftwaffe markings retained, their cockpits now occupied by Finnish crews. The same missions continued. The same dark lakes, the same forest margins, the same silent departures and uncertain returns. One was eventually returned to Germany. The other was surrendered to the Soviets when Finland signed the Moscow Armistice in September 1944, bringing its war and the HE-115's Finnish chapter to a close. But the war itself was not yet over, and somewhere in the wreckage of a collapsing Reich, the HE-115 was still in the skies. Germany's own Special Operations Unit, KG-200, the most secretive flying organization in the Luftwaffe, had also recognized that the HE-115 made an excellent vehicle for dropping its agents behind enemy lines. It continued to use HE-115s for these missions as late as 1944, long after the aircraft had been withdrawn from conventional operations. By the time the war in Europe ended in May 1945, the HE-115 had all but vanished. The last examples were found abandoned by their German crews at a naval airbase in the far north of Norway, where they were destroyed by Norwegian forces in the weeks after the ceasefire. By the end of 1945, no airworthy survivors remained. The aircraft that had crossed the North Sea in the dark, landed on Finnish lakes, ferried agents into occupied Europe, and skipped in and out of Mediterranean harbors in enemy markings, had simply disappeared, apparently forever. But 6 decades later, it would unexpectedly reappear. In 2005, a Norwegian survey vessel was testing new sonar equipment in the Haversfjord, a few miles from Stavanger, when it detected a large anomaly on the seabed. Divers went down to investigate. What they found was a Heinkel HE-115 lying upside down in the silt, 120 feet below the surface, where it had rested since a botched landing in December 1942 had sent it to the bottom. It had been there for 63 years, and yet, when it was finally raised in 2012, the condition of the wreck stopped the recovery team cold. The aluminum fuselage had barely corroded. Closely riveted panels looked, according to one restorer, as though they'd been put together recently by Heinkel. A machine gun still had a belt of ammunition attached. The Nazi swastika on the tailplane was clearly visible. The aircraft is now being slowly restored at the Flyhistorisk Museum in Sola, in the same hangar from which it flew many of its wartime missions. While it will likely never fly again, the Haversfjord aircraft is the HE-115's most complete survivor, the only one that can tell the full story of what the aircraft was. But elsewhere, the sea has been less generous. Off the coast of Malta, fishermen trawling their nets decades after the war hauled up fragments of wreckage from the Mediterranean seabed. They were identified as belonging to BV-185, the aircraft that slipped out of Calafrana on a September night in 1941, turned into a bright flash of light, and took its crew and its secrets to the bottom. The wrecked parts are now in a museum in Malta. They're the only physical trace of an operation that was never officially acknowledged, carried out by an aircraft that ended up carrying far more secrets than anyone had ever imagined.